Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Okay, my name is Giulio. Yeah, you already hear about that. And tonight we will talk a little about database deployments. This is just a first part of an introductory talk, so very basic stuff. And let me see. All right, if we can. All right. Yeah. So. Uh, you will find yourself in similar situation. So you are a small team and you have a greenfield application, you're writing code from scratch and you are discussing how we will manage our database schema, how we will manage our changes, how we will evolve our database. So typically you have some people with more expertise on databases. I pick it up Chewbacca for this because that's typical, the relationship that happens between developers and DBAs. They don't understand each other. They are talking different languages. And it seems that the DBA is emitting sounds and people don't understand what they say. But really they are smart people and they are telling important stuff. But people don't understand that. And often developers get lost in what they say. So they opt for this kind of tool. I pick it up DB up for exemplifying a couple of ideas. But what's the interest for the team to use a tool like DBApp? Because it's free, has a great support community behind, it's open source, so you can fix, you can tweak. It supports a lot of different databases, relational databases, uh, also on the client side, so SQLite, a lot of stuff. And works because it's kind of a well-known tool in the community, is solid, can be applied in a lot of scenarios, for example, for a fat client application, as was said in the past. A lot of interesting things about it. So the team is delivering sprint after sprint. We deliver changes to the database. Everything is fine until one day something happens. They deploy a change, yet another change to the database, and they find themselves in a very, very unpleasant situation. Everything is broken and they start to lose data. And what the heck is this mess? And they roll back, they go back with the restore and start again. And they understand, oh, the culprit is the tool, we need to change the tool. How often in a small team, after a few months, they say, no, we made a wrong decision there. We need to change our tool, everything. It's not our process, it's not us, it's the tool. Okay, and the DBA is happy. And so what happened with a tool like DBApp? It's a tool that is called migration-based tool. So what you do is you write a script, and the script is defining a single change to the database. What single? Let's say a unit change to the database. So you have a script, for example, to add the column. You have another script to add the store procedure, and so on and so forth. Depending on the database you use, you have different syntax. So what you write in the script will be usually database dependent. So you will use the dialect of the target relational database management system, but you can apply this to non-SQL also. I took this picture from much better known articles and stuff. So if you think of a scenario where you have in your database a table and a store procedure, and the store procedure is just doing a simple query, simple select from the table, you really have two objects in your database, and one object is dependent on the other. So you have a relationship between the two objects. So you must be careful in how you manage these dependencies. So it may happen that two developers are writing scripts, one without looking over the shoulder of the other, and so they write different things touching the same objects. In this example, we have that the developer A, let's say Alice, is altering the table, adding a column, and so consequently is matching the store procedure that is doing the select from the table in order to pick up the additional column. Another developer, say Bob, is renaming the table. Could be renaming a column and so on, but this is very highlighting the problem. And so is also matching the store procedure to as a consequence of the dependency. So also the store procedure will change the content and select from the new table name. So if you look, the two versions of the store procedure cannot work at the same time because one is referring to columns and the other one is referring to a different table name. So if you run one script before the other, you end up with an error because you are altering the alter procedure will not find the table. The alter table will not find the table with that name because the rename has already happened. On the other hand, if you run the AC script before the B script, you end up that you have a silent failure. So you have that the new store procedure is still selecting one column only from the right table, but only one column. So you're losing the change that Alice made. And that's a common problem with all migration-based tools. We have Flyway, there are TP Maestro, but yeah, most of it. There are Liquibase, there are tons of tools that are migration-based and they all suffer from this common problem. So if you're not careful, the changes will stomp on each other. So our nice team has decided to change the strategy. So let's use a completely different tool. Let's use DuckPack, which is Microsoft. We are using MS SQL. We are good to go and blah, blah, blah. And we have a lot of support and other tool on the side. So again, after a few months, they discover a bad situation again. They discover an unpleasant truth again. So even this type of tool doesn't cover all the possible situations you may face in changing a database schema, and you will face some kind of errors. What's different from the previous tool? A tool like SQL, okay, I forgot the name. The DuckPack and the consequent tools is state-based. It means that you describe the database configuration by describing the state that you want this database to be in. So typically you use a neutral language like XML or JSON, or you use a SQL dialect to express the structure of your database. And when you want to change the database, you go straight to the model and change the structure. So for example, in the similar example, when we want to add a column, we just add the column to the create table statement or to the equivalent XML construct. Similar for store procedure, we just write the new form of the store procedure. It will be the tool that compute the differences between the target database and the model and compute the delta scripts and apply it. What happens with changes? Let's imagine again that we have a baseline with a single table, table foobar, with two columns, foo and bar. And again, we do the trick that the new baseline has renamed one of the columns. What will happen by default from the tool is that the diff is to drop a column and add a new one. because the tool by itself, if it is not guided, will think, oh, one column has disappeared, another one is in, so I need to drop and add instead of doing a rename. It's not able by himself to understand that this was a rename, the intention of the developer. So even if schema-based tool can put you in trouble if you're not careful. So what kind of solution we have when you have to manage the database schema? The solution is try to combine this tool, is try to be aware of what the problem that can cause each kind of tool. So they're not wrong per se, they're just limited. So a tool like DBApp, Flyway, Liquibase, and so on and so forth, there are a lot of handwritten tools that just deploy a sequence of scripts to a database. All those migration-based scripts tools typically hides conflicts made in parallel by developers. And the order when you run the scripts is very important. So you need to test all combination of orders that can screw up your database. On the other hand, state-based tools like DuckPack, SQL Manage, many of the Red Hat Redgate basic tool, they use state-based and they typically miss object renames. You have to do special actions to say, I want you to rename this column, this table, this store procedure. Otherwise, the tool will drop and recreate it. And also, another issue you have with the state-based is that any drift that the database may have is rolled back. So when you apply the change, so if you manually did some change to the database schema in production, for example, by adding an index, they will be rolled back because they are not described in the model unless you are careful in reapplying to the model any minimal change that you do in production to the schema. So you need to be very careful, very disciplined. And that's the common theme for any change you make to databases. A lot of discipline, you need to be careful that any change applied to an environment is put back into the source control and will be merged to your model, be it a migration-based model or a state-based model. So typically, I find that migration-based models are the best when you have shrink-wrapped software or in general software that you can have multiple instances in customer installation. So if you have your application and each of your customer has a database instance locally on premise, and you need to deliver the new version of your software, and the customer will install from whatever version they have, a migration-based tool is the easiest to use, taking care of the limits that it has. The state-based is simpler, much simpler to use and easier to understand when you have a single version of the database, when you have only one database of reference, which is the typical scenario when you have a web-based application, an API service in the cloud, this kind of scenario when you have a single version of the database. State-based are much and way more natural way of proceeding. So it's up to you which tool is best for your specific scenario, for your application. And that's more or less my recommendation. Study, learn how they work, do your test, and a lot of discipline. That's the most important recommendation that I have. They're not completely exclusive, so you can use both at the same time for in some kind of combination. It's easy, for example, to have some kind of checkpoint from your database schema. It's just a few lines of code writing a tool that will get the schema and check if it has changed with reference to a baseline version. So there are a lot of options here to combine the two. Yeah, for a few minutes, I say just hi if you want to contact me, Twitter, email, and easily to find my name by just using your preferred search engine. Typically end up with my tools. I put here in the deck a few references to the tools and articles that talk about database deployment. There are a lot more to say. Clearly, in 15 minutes, I try to do my best in be short and just go to a couple of interesting points. That's all.